Oh, dude, did you see the Champions League? Obviously. Who doesn't see the CONCACAF Champions Cup? Hey, I don't know why it's not called the Champions League, but there were two Champions Leagues that happened this weekend, and there's a large controversy. It's not a large controversy, but I prefer to put on my tinfoil hat in this situation and make it a large controversy, swirling around the CONCACAF Champions Cup final. The final was between Mexican side Pachuca and MLS side Columbus Crew. Pachuca being the favorites, they got to host the final at their stadium, which is basically on Mars. Its elevation is 8,000 feet, which is nuts. That's like 33% higher than Denver, Colorado, which is already called the Mile High City. It is a ridiculous elevation advantage. But I believe, according to this tinfoil hat that I'm wearing on my head, that it's not the only advantage that Pachuca was looking to garner. No, I believe that allegedly something else might have been at play, because Pachuca ended up winning this match 3-0. And we're going to get to the controversy in a second, but I'm upset with you. I'm disappointed with you. Because I've gone through this entire weekend, and you might have noticed something. The view hasn't changed. Sure, I still look sexy, but the view that you have, it has not changed. I have not redone my desk. No. In fact, I accomplished exactly nothing on Saturday. I took a day off for the first time in a long time, and let me tell you what. It was awesome. And when I say took a day off, I still recorded my Zealandism. Let's be honest. But I didn't do anything else except for record the Zealandisms, which means it's a day off for me. And we haven't reset the desk yet. I told you to bully me, right? I have all of the resources to set up my actual desk the way that it's actually supposed to be, put up my third monitor and everything else, but you're not letting it happen. You're not making it happen. You got to be proactive with this, right? Because I'm lazy. I will procrastinate. I will choose to not realign I'll choose not to redo my desk. It'll take weeks, right, until all of these things are actually the way that they're supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? I will procrastinate all the way if you let me. But there has not been nearly enough of people making fun of the fact that I haven't moved and rearranged this desk yet. Because once we do that, then we can start setting up the background, which is what we really want to happen, right? But it's obviously not happened yet either. None of it's happened. And it will never happen unless you bully me into, setting up my desk. Right? That and running. I still haven't started training for the marathon either. We've got two things that I'm completely failing at. But if I wanted to train for the marathon, maybe I should head up to Pachuca because the elevation's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I have a podcast. You may or may not know that. It's called the Player Manager Podcast. It's me and a guy that plays at Inter Miami named Julian Gressel. He is the only player at Inter Miami to have started every match. Or played in every match, I think is the right way to say it. Messi obviously was out with an injury and everything. So we have a podcast together, Player Manager, and we had a guest on that podcast named Christian Ramirez in the last podcast that we did. And Christian Ramirez is a striker for the Columbus Crew. He plays for Columbus. They're headed to the Champions Cup final, so we talked to him a lot about that. They were doing everything they could to prepare for the altitude. The Columbus Crew staff had gone into each Columbus player's home and installed like an altitude tent over their bed, which meant every night they were sleeping at the altitude of Pachuca. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm not surprised it was a thing, but it's like a tent you can put over your bed, basically like an altitude chamber, right? They were training and working out in altitude masks for weeks to get ready to go play this Champions Cup final in Pachuca. And so they were ready. And Christian and I would assume the rest of the team, who I didn't talk to, they were very excited for this CONCACAF Champions Cup final. Right? They were also apparently excited for me to reset my desk, but Christian was a lovely guy. He's had a long career. I played in Scotland for a little while at Aberdeen, but he's back. He's kind of he's 30. How old are you, Chris? He's 33. So he's kind of he's got, I believe, one appearance for the U.S. national team. He's in the, I would say, late prime of his career. So this is an opportunity, and also if they win this match, to go to the Club World Cup, which, talking to Christian Ramirez, is something that they were really excited about. The Club World Cup for clubs from CONCACAF and basically anywhere that's not Europe, the Club World Cup is something that looks really exciting, right? So they were excited about the opportunity to do that. But of course, they lost 3-0. I already spoiled the ending for you. They went out, they lost 3-0. They didn't look good. Pachuca looked good. They scored early, 2 goals in the second half, and it was kind of a walk. It's just one goal in the second half, scored in the 12th minute. They had 23 shots. Columbus only had 11. There's a freaking Yahoo Sports article. Columbus Crew failed on all fronts in the Champions Cup final, right? Like, it was not, Columbus Crew just got walked. Pachuca, they went out and they took care of business and they beat them. But my theory is it wasn't the altitude. Because this team in Columbus, and talking to Christian, right, they've been working on it. They had been working on it for a long time to be able to handle that altitude. But according to like CONCACAF rules, they couldn't travel to Pachuca until Thursday night, right? And the game is on Saturday night. So you travel to Pachuca on Thursday night. You basically have 2 days in Pachuca, and then you start playing on Saturday night. Apparently, that can be better because then maybe you're not affected by altitude sickness in the same way, which I have family in Colorado. So altitude sickness is basically you feel lightheaded, your stomach gets kind of messed up, and your lips get chapped every 5 seconds. It's wonderful. Third part's not really part of altitude sickness. The other two, they are, at least in terms of the way altitude affects me. Like you jump into a crazy altitude like that quickly, that's just how you feel if you're coming from not crazy altitude. But something else happened Thursday night, because Friday morning, get your tinfoil hats ready. Are they on? Friday morning, Columbus Crews players started to complain about a stomach bug. Okay, now altitude sickness, I've experienced a lot of times. Your stomach's just rolling a little bit. Maybe you go to the bathroom a little bit more, and you're not eating particularly fancy food. But what Columbus Crews started to report was that there was a pretty serious stomach bug going around the club as of Friday morning. So follow the timeline with me here. Thursday, they get in. I'm assuming you have a meal, you go to sleep, you wake up Friday morning, and food poisoning starts to hit. Apparently by Friday night, I want to make sure I get the timeline right. This is from an article from AOL.com, described it best. I didn't know that was still a thing. But yeah. But they reported that according to Wilfred Nancy, who's the really tremendous coach of Columbus, by the way, I think he's going to end up being a coach of a major team in Europe in the next couple of years because he is a fantastic coach of Columbus Crew. He's done wonders with Columbus and now having a podcast with guys that play in MLS. He has Julian, who is the other half of the podcast, played for Wilfred Nancy. The guy has a really big hype train going. He's probably the best coaching prospect in MLS right now. But he was saying that Friday morning, multiple players started feeling symptoms, and that by Saturday evening, which of course is when they're playing the Champions Cup final, nearly the entire roster and coaching staff had caught what the club expects to be food poisoning. I'm sorry. I'm not like some crazy conspiracy theorist, but for your entire team to come down with food poisoning right after you get to Pachuca is some Michael Jordan flu game level bullshit, right? Like somebody tainted the food. I was like, do I know this? No. Does it look like it? Yeah. Right? Like, could you arrest anybody with the evidence that I've compiled so far and laid before you? No, all I've laid before you is a timeline in a history of nonsense in CONCACAF, right? And I've laid that every time I talk about CONCACAF, we talk about the utter absurdity and nonsense and the eggshells at buses and so on and so forth, playing and wrestling in mud pits in El Salvador. The nonsense of CONCACAF, the absurdity, the over-the-top nature of the fans. I wouldn't put it by anyone to have been involved in the poisoning of Columbus, which I think is hilarious. I mean, leave no stone unturned, right? The altitude's already a huge advantage, but now you poison the team as well. Wilfred Nancy was talking about it. He said, this is not an excuse. This is a fact that we didn't have the energy that we usually have. So it was weird, I will say, because we didn't know how to act with that, but they took medicine and they gave everything. He was saying, obviously, it's really hard when something really does affect the match. So clearly Columbus Crew was not themselves in this match. I'm not saying Pachuca wouldn't have won anyways, but it's clear the Columbus Crew was not themselves. Wilfred Nancy seemed very aware of that. They took medicine. They gave everything. It actually was unveiled that apparently they had a bunch of discussions with players about whether they would play at all in the Champions Cup final. The Crew's sickness was having such an impact on the players that the players and Nancy had a conversation earlier in the day about playing. They wanted to compete no matter what, because we know what we did to get here and the support, but this is something we cannot control. We try to control many things, but on this one, this is the situation. And while that is commendable to steer the ship right into the storm and try and play through food poisoning, if you've ever had food poisoning, if this was indeed a team-wide bout of food poisoning, it's borderline impossible to perform as a world-class athlete at 8,000 feet above sea level while suffering from the effects of food poisoning. Like, it is entirely possible that the timing just happened to line up that right after they got to Mexico, they got a real terrible batch of food, or somebody decided to serve them up the extra spicy, like the local Mexican spicy, and the boys at Columbus Crew couldn't handle it. But look, I'm just saying, the timeline does not look great. Right? And this would not be the first time that something like this has happened in sports. I mean, we've got fans lighting off fireworks outside hotels and everything. Michael Jordan clearly believes his flu game was because somebody gave him a tainted pizza because that was the only thing left open if you've ever watched The Last Dance. And I am sure a lot of people at Columbus Crew, even though because they have no evidence, they can't say anything, believe that somebody was involved, whether it be a fan or whatever, in like tainting the food around the Champions Cup. But Pachuca has sealed the last spot to the Club World Cup. Congrats to them for winning the Champions Cup. And maybe, give a Medal of Honor to the fan that was running the restaurant that happened to cater the Columbus Crew on Thursday night, because that might, they might have done a lot to earn it. You know what I'm saying?